In the shadows of global finance, a hidden cartel shaped the very structure of our economy. What was once a silent partner in the development of wealth now pulls the strings of inflation. As we sit at the precipice, we must ask, how did this system evolve? And more importantly, is there a way out? The rise of modern inflation didn't happen overnight. It didn't begin with a single event, but with a calculated strategy. At the dawn of the 20th century, a powerful invisible group of financiers quietly bent the rules of money. Their vision, control over how money moved, control over the very fabric of our economy. It wasn't a conspiracy, but it was close. The same way the gears of a clock turn silently, the actions of these financial elites were invisible to most. The system they created didn't just serve them, it served everyone. At first glance, it appeared as a model of prosperity. After all, the world was expanding. Nations were growing wealthier. People were building empires. But something else was simmering beneath the surface: leverage. They didn't just fund nations, they engineered debt. The architects of inflation understood that debt isn't just borrowing money. It's borrowing control. By controlling currency, they didn't just lend, they leveraged their position to dictate terms. The central banks, the ones entrusted with stability, became their primary tools. In exchange for money, nations took on chains of debt. These banks, in turn, operated under the guidance of a few central players. They shaped interest rates, controlled liquidity, and made the very value of money bend to their will. As the decades passed, the system grew. The leverage deepened. Debt became a weapon, not a burden. It wasn't about just borrowing, it was about creating an unbreakable cycle. Inflation was the constant companion, the rising tide that lifted all boats, but only for those at the top. At the time, it seemed harmless. After all, nations needed money to fuel expansion. But what people didn't see was that every loan was a promise that would someday be repaid, with interest. The financial elites made sure that this repayment never came easy. They ensured that debt would always grow faster than prosperity. Confidence is collateral. When trust in the system is fragile, inflation is the consequence. It's a quiet storm, brewing beneath the calm surface of prosperity. Sound familiar? Let's move forward and explore how this quiet storm turned into a full-scale economic structure. But first, we need to understand the mechanism behind it. The cartel wasn't just a secret society of bankers. They built a financial infrastructure that spans continents, manipulating currencies and leveraging scarcity. The result? A system designed to make money grow for them and debt grow for everyone else. The cartel's influence wasn't confined to darkened rooms or whispered meetings. No, their power was far more expansive. They built a system, a network of central banks, governments, and financial institutions that spanned the globe. These were not just tools of trade. They were weapons, tools for control. At the heart of this system was currency manipulation. But how does one control money without anyone noticing? The answer: artificial scarcity. The cartel didn't flood the world with cash, they limited it. By controlling the supply of money through central banks, they could create an illusion of scarcity. The less there was, the more valuable it seemed. But here's the catch: scarcity doesn't create value, it creates dependency. Governments, businesses, and individuals were forced to borrow. They had no choice. The cartel understood that leverage isn't about just taking, it's about convincing the world that they needed what you had. The more scarce the money, the more valuable the debt. And when debt becomes necessary, it's no longer a choice. It's a cycle. A cycle the cartel was more than happy to feed. So how did they profit? With every loan, they took a piece. Every time a government borrowed, every time an individual took out a mortgage or a business sought expansion, the cartel took a cut. Their wealth didn't come from producing anything tangible. It came from creating the very thing that would enslave economies: debt. The true cost of debt isn't the interest paid. It's the control over those who owe. The cartel became the unseen hand behind every financial decision, Debt wasn't just a way to borrow, it was a tool to keep the world in check. And as governments borrowed more, the cartel's coffers grew fatter. The greater the debt, the greater the leverage. But here's the thing, eventually that debt grows too large. The system starts to crack. The leverage becomes unsustainable. Sound familiar? Let's take a closer look at what happens when the system becomes too big to fail, and the inevitable breakdown that follows. The cartel's success was built on pushing the limits of credit, but unchecked leverage fueled unsustainable booms, masking the inequalities beneath. In the end, it was the public who paid the price. The foundations of the cartel's empire weren't built on production or invention, they were built on leverage. Credit became their tool, debt their currency. It wasn't just about borrowing, it was about borrowing beyond reason, beyond what any individual or government could ever repay. And the more they borrowed, the more their control expanded. At first, it looked like prosperity. Nations were growing richer. The stock market surged, fueled by a never-ending stream of borrowed money. Credit flowed like water, and with it came the promise of limitless wealth. But as the tide of credit rose, so did speculation. And speculation doesn't build empires, it builds bubbles. The cartel wasn't just funding growth, they were fueling an illusion. A booming market where the value of assets became disconnected from their true worth. As leverage grew, so did the risk. But the cartel was always in control. They knew how to play the game. They knew that these bubbles would eventually pop. But by then they would have already cashed in. For them it was a win-win. They made fortunes as the market boomed, and when the crash came, they were in position to buy everything up for pennies on the dollar. They created the boom, and then they profited from the inevitable bust. But what about everyone else? The public? The ones who didn't have the insider knowledge, who weren't part of the game. They were left holding the bag. When the bubble popped, they were the ones who lost their savings, their homes, their livelihoods. The inequality was glaring, but it was obscured by the glittering promise of prosperity. The real cost was buried beneath the market's false narrative. Not everyone was in on the game. The public was sold a lie. They were told to buy, to invest, to build. But when the music stopped, it was the public who paid the price. The cartel? They emerged unscathed, even richer. This isn't just a story from the past. It's a pattern. And as history has shown, bubbles don't pop, they implode. The boom becomes a symptom of something much darker. But who really pays the price? Let's explore what happens when the debt becomes too great and the system crashes under its own weight. The system eventually cracked. Speculation led to a devastating collapse, shattering trust in currencies, banks and governments. But the cartel didn't retreat. They doubled down, consolidating even more power in the wake of the destruction. Inevitably, the system broke. It had been propped up by borrowed time, and time ran out. Speculation, unchecked leverage and inflated markets came crashing down. The stock market crash of 1929 wasn't just a financial event, it was the breaking point of an entire system. It exposed the myth of perpetual growth, the lie of endless prosperity. As the market crashed, the world watched in disbelief. The same forces that had driven the boom now triggered the bust. What had once seemed like an unshakable foundation now crumbled under the weight of its own instability. The public, already burdened by debt, watched as their savings disappeared overnight. They watched as their trust in the currency they used, the banks they relied on, and the governments they voted for shattered into pieces. Inflation spiraled. Money lost its value. Banks failed. The government tried to step in, but it was too late. The damage had been done. Trust had been eroded. People no longer believed in the system. They had learned the hard way that money was nothing more than a promise. But promises are easily broken, and faith in the system was gone. But the cartel didn't retreat. They didn't step back, reassess, or learn from the mistakes of the past. No, they doubled down. They consolidated power. As governments scrambled to contain the chaos, the cartel moved in to secure its hold. The aftermath of the crash was the perfect opportunity for them to buy up assets at rock-bottom prices. They swooped in, acquiring banks, industries, and real estate that were left in ruin. While the rest of the world suffered, the cartel grew richer. They were the ones who were prepared. What did the cartel do next to maintain control? They tightened their grip even further. Instead of being held accountable, they took advantage of the collapse to reinforce their dominance. The system had broken, but for them, it was an opportunity to rebuild it on their terms. We'll come back to that. But for now we must ask, can trust ever be restored? Or is it too late for the public to ever believe in the system again? The world has changed. Technology has revolutionized the way we interact with money. What was once an opaque system controlled by a few select individuals is now far more invisible. The mechanisms of control are now encoded in lines of code. Apps, algorithms, and digital currencies serve the same purpose the cartel once did. But now they do it at an unimaginable scale and speed. Take digital currency. It's the new frontier of financial control. Unlike traditional money, cryptocurrency is decentralized, at least on the surface. But as the market for digital coins grows, a new cartel is emerging. A handful of tech moguls, crypto investors, and major financial institutions are consolidating power, just as the old cartel did with paper currency. They dictate the value of money, and they do so without transparency. Apps that were once designed for convenience are now used as tools of control. Stock trading platforms, mobile payment systems, and financial apps are the new fronts for leverage. The convenience of digital transactions masks the underlying truth. These systems are designed to keep the wealthy in control. Every tap on a phone screen is another transaction that benefits them, not the average person. Every purchase, every trade is another way for the public to chase shadows while the wealth continues to concentrate in the hands of a few. But what's different today? The speed, the acceleration, the rise of high-frequency trading, algorithm-driven market decisions, and the instant nature of digital currency have supercharged the cartel's control. The sheer speed at which money moves now makes it nearly impossible for the average person to catch up. Markets can rise and crash in minutes, not days. Investors are manipulated by machines, not human brokers. And as the wealthy grow wealthier, the public is left scrambling, constantly behind the curve. We've seen this before. The same strategies, the same structures. The faces have changed, but the game remains the same. The cartel of old may have evolved, but its goal hasn't. They still manipulate the flow of money, still create false scarcity, still profit while the public is left to deal with the consequences. But now, it's faster. And with speed comes greater risk. The consequences are more severe, more immediate. And just as in the past, the public pays the price. So, where do we go from here? Can we regain control, or are we trapped in a system designed for collapse? The world is interconnected now. No longer is the cartel's influence confined to a single country or a select group of elites. Their tactics have gone global. Today, inflation, debt, and inequality reverberate across borders, infecting developing economies with the same financial diseases that once plagued the richest nations. What started as a local problem has exploded into a global contagion. In the past, a financial crisis in one country might have stayed isolated, but with global markets and digital money flows, the contagion spreads instantly. A collapse in one economy can trigger a domino effect. A stock market crash in New York can affect bond markets in London. A currency devaluation in Brazil can send ripples across Asia. The interconnectedness of the modern economy has made us all vulnerable. What happens in one part of the world no longer stays there. It's felt everywhere. This isn't just a financial issue. It's a social one. The cartel has cultivated a system where debt and inflation are the price of entry into the global economy. Those who have the power to create money are the ones who control the global system. And those who don't? They are left with mountains of debt and increasingly worthless currency. The divide between the wealthy and the poor continues to widen, now more than ever. As the rich continue to accumulate, the poor are left chasing after increasingly elusive wealth. But the worst part: the cartel has learned to use this interconnectedness to their advantage. They know that when one market falls, they can buy up the pieces for pennies on the dollar. They know that when one country collapses, they can take control of industries, land and resources for a fraction of their true worth. The greater the crisis, the more they gain. So what comes next? Can we break free from the cycle? Or is this the inevitable conclusion of our financial future? The system is built to perpetuate itself. It thrives on debt, inflation and inequality. And as the world continues to borrow its way into crisis, it becomes harder to imagine any other way of life. Are we on the brink of collapse, or can we find a way out? The answers lie in the choices we make, but the clock is ticking and the game is rigged. The system we've built, the one that seems to reward debt and inflation, that concentrates power in the hands of a few, wasn't inevitable. It was designed, and today, the world continues to pay the price. The question is, can we break free, or have we become too entangled in a cycle that benefits only those at the top? The answer isn't clear, but it's up to us to find it. If you found this eye-opening, like this video, subscribe to this channel, and comment down below. Here's a thought to leave you with. If this system is rigged, what's the first step we can take to unrig it?